you. Thanks. Where's Barry? There he is. Hi. Okay.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hi, we're here at Radiodays Asia to talk about what we love, radio, audio, and podcasts. This is one of the BBC's most successful podcasts. It's called Global News Podcast, and here to tell us more about it are host Jackie Leonard and editor Karen Martin. So Jackie, tell us how it all started.
It must be said that the Global News Podcast that we all know and love did not start with great fanfare. And if you don't already know and love it, you can subscribe at BBC Sounds or wherever you normally get your podcasts. Got that out of the way. It started in August 2007, so it's celebrating 15 years. When it was launched, though, it did not start, as I say, with fanfare or ambition or money. Following a good old-fashioned BBC tradition, when the World Service was launched back in 1932, the guy who launched it, Lord Reith, famously said that the programs would be neither very interesting nor very good. They would just get a job done. And that's pretty much how the Global News Pod started, which is lovely. So basically, somebody very much higher up the food chain than either of us had been to an event, similar, I think, to this one, and had heard of this very exciting thing called podcasts that were going to be the future of audio, and decided, yeah, we need to be in on that, so we'll do that. Now, at that point, I was presenting a news program on the World Service, and we came into work one day on shift to get a memo saying, oh, you're doing this extra thing.
I love it when that happens, don't you?
So at the end of a shift, we had to record and upload this thing called a podcast. And nobody had sold the concept to us. We weren't quite sure what they were. We certainly didn't know why. We were doing it with no extra people, no extra money, no extra time, and everybody was thrilled that we had been given this extra opportunity, shall we say. And so over a period of time, we kind of, it was very much an afterthought. So we recorded pretty much the content of the previous news program that we had just done, and we'd maybe steal a thing from NewsHour or one of the other programs. But basically, we were recording the last thing that we had done. And occasionally, people even forgot to do it. I mean, it was that much of an afterthought. If it had been a busy day, people would be on the bus on the way home, it was like, oh, the podcast, which was popular. The one thing that we were absolutely 100% certain about was that the guy who had launched this thing on us, and nobody important upstairs, was listening. We were absolutely sure about this. And if they were listening, they certainly weren't listening to the end. So I kind of started sneaking in the odd joke or pun, or actually really bad puns, about the end, about the podcast, about the news, about my colleagues. And it turned out that people were actually listening. Who knew? And over a period of time, we developed a loyal and, fairly substantial audience.
And so it started as a news podcast. Can you elaborate on?
We were none of us very convinced that news would even work as a podcast, because the beauty of radio news tends to be that it's now, it's immediate. You don't have to wait for the cameras to get there, you don't have to wait for pictures, but it's now. Why would anybody want to listen to news which was a few hours old? And yet, it turned out that it really does work, and especially in recent years with constant rolling news and the world being, looks around, it's a useful thing because people can be a bit overwhelmed by the constant stream of events.
Well, you quite often hear the same thing over and over again, and no new news, do you?
And also, it's difficult to know sometimes which bits are actually new. And I'm pretty sure that everybody in this room who's got a news app at some point has heard the news alert go off and thought, oh, God, now what? Is that just me? And so it's really, really useful. With a news podcast, it puts a pin in a moment of time. It's a moment of focus. It's a moment of calm. This is what the world looked like at 13 hours GMT on Wednesday. And it's a moment of reflection, and it just puts a stop. And if there's a story that you find difficult or distressing, you can scoot on forward. If there's something that you wanted to double check, you can scoot back, but you're choosing when you're good and ready to listen to it. And you can cut out the white noise that's going on elsewhere.
And so you said at the beginning it was kind of a summary of what you'd just done, really. But now, how do you decide what goes into each podcast episode?
We got a little bit more magpie, didn't we? We decided to... We don't just take stuff from our programme, which is the newsroom, which goes out 6 times a day across 24 hours. You probably should listen to that as well. So we also take things from various other radio programmes on the BBC World Service, and also domestic output. If we find that they've done a particularly good job on something, we'll sometimes steal things from TV as well. The way we decide on what the stories are, for a global news pod audience, we need a sweep geographically, obviously. You don't want one particular region or one particular story dominating any more than it cannot be avoided. But you also need some light and shade, some chiaroscuro. So you don't just want the geopolitics and the economics and the health stories. You also want the inspirational stuff. You want the arts. You want big sports stories. You want animal stories. I'm very keen on animal stories. And it's something that it's not too overwhelming. The point is that people need to have a texture and a rhythm, and it needs to be interesting and engaging all the way through. And the beauty as well of working at the World Service, we have correspondents from around the world, but we also have language services who will let us know if something big and exciting is happening in their patch, possibly before other media have picked it up. We also have a fantastic resource called BBC Monitoring, and they are a team of linguists and journalists who listen to, read, absorb, scroll through the media in lots and lots and lots of different languages, and they will pick up that people in China are all talking about this, or people in the United States have got very excited about that. But the United States is an obvious one, but there are people who will let us know when something is emerging, when something is developing. So we have a huge opportunity to not just to do the big news stories, but also to sort of inform our listeners about things that they don't necessarily know they're interested in yet.
That sounds like it could be slightly overwhelming. Is it? Can it be, or do you have like a strategy to not be overwhelmed by things?
Well, we kind of try to ensure that there is this, there is the inspirational as well as the heavy, if you like. We try not to be too heavy.
Do you ever do any specials or anything like that?
Yeah, we do. I mean, I said before that we don't like to have one story dominate, but obviously there are occasions when we're getting lots of emails about a particular story, and so there are some stories that are just so big and so multifaceted and all-encompassing that just sort of dedicating a few minutes of the podcast to it isn't enough. So on those occasions, we have gathered together various of our correspondents, experts, and put listeners' questions to them. So we did a few of those, and some of those have been some of our biggest editions. So we did a Brexit one. We got together with the Brexit cast team, which is another BBC podcast, and we talked about what was going on, and we asked questions, and we were given answers. We did Afghanistan just over a year ago. Ukraine we did with another BBC podcast team called Ukrainecast. They are absolutely brilliant. And So we've also talked several times about coronavirus. My colleague Jonathan Savage has been talking about climate change. So those are specials. They sit in our stream, but they don't usurp the actual news podcast, because even when something is huge and all-encompassing, it's not the only thing happening in the world. And it's important to sort of keep ticking over. Yes, we haven't forgotten what's happening over here. This is still going on. And the rest of the world hasn't stopped just because something ghastly is happening somewhere.
So you've got the specials. Are there any other, I mean, it's obviously evolved in many ways, but what are the main kind of ways that the podcast has evolved then? In the 15 years, that's a really long time, isn't it?
Yes.
I think that's where I come in.
That's where you come in.
So, yes, I'm the editor of the podcast, and I came along about 8 years ago, and podcasting was new to me. I'm a radio broadcaster, really. And at the time I joined, I was asked to cut a cake for the 10 millionth download that month, I think. And I thought, wow, 10 million, that's amazing. And I thought, but hang on a minute, if we've got 10 million and we're not really blowing our own trumpet.
No advertising, no nothing.
Yeah, and we're not really giving it the love and care and attention, maybe we could double or even treble that. So I set about doing that. Thanks to the last speaker, Ralph, because actually almost all of what he said can apply to the podcast. Authenticity, love, all of those things. So I concentrated on 3 main areas, and with the audience at the heart of everything. So if we had 10 million people wanting to listen, why was that? What were they getting from it? So the first thing that we have is, amazing content from BBC correspondents around the world who bring an authenticity to it like no other. They are there at the scene where the thing is happening. They live there, they have families there, they know how that place or region ticks. So when they tell you what's going on there, you can be sure that it's firsthand. I really like when Ralph was saying, people believe their ears more than anything, and so what you get is almost a soundscape at the same time as information and analysis. So that's what they get in the podcast. But the second thing is it's regular as clockwork. So it's twice a day and once at weekends. And if you subscribe to it, you always know when the next one's coming. And the reason that's absolutely crucial is audiences tell us they build it into their lives. And it's about 30 minutes long, give or take. And if we go over, we hear about it because someone's gym routine is that long, or their commute is that long, or however it is they use it in their lives. We have to make sure that it works for them. Occasionally, with specials, we go over, but we almost ask their permission and explain to them that on this occasion it's going to be longer, and open that sort of very honest dialogue. And that brings me on to the third thing, audiences. The BBC, possibly organisations in this room as well, we tended to keep our audience at arm's length. And that's being nice about it. We probably spoke at them, sometimes down to them, and there wasn't a two-way relationship there. So I set about trying to speak to the audience, finding out who they were, what they liked, what they didn't like. And as a result, at the end of each podcast, we are on Twitter, but that's not how most people contact us. Most people contact us by old-fashioned email. And they email into a generic email, but I read every single email. And if it's a complaint, I try to address it, put out a correction, say we're sorry. But even in that email, some people, I think they are complaining just to an entity, not a person. And when I write back with my name and my sign-off, they're quite surprised and sometimes a bit apologetic about their tone. I have had to say to some people, I get your point, but whoa, calm down there. But then I begin a conversation with them about what they do like and what they would like to hear. And 99 times out of 100, they become even more committed than they were. And I'm sure you all know, if someone bothers to write in to complain, it means they're invested. So, you do need to address those things. More than that, people write in and tell us what's going on in their lives. They send, recently we had a picture sent in by a man who showed us he was listening to the Global News podcast in Nepal while milking his cow. And it's just a beautiful snapshot of what people are doing, you know, around the world. We actually have a real paper map up on the wall, and listeners email in and say where they're listening from, and they get a pin in the map and a shout out. My first experience of audiences wanting to be involved was as a result of some story to do with dairy produce. I can't remember what it was. And people started writing in about their favourite cheese. And it was the most weird thing, but they wanted to tell us their favourite cheese, and then by reading those out, someone else did, and then someone else wanted to write in about being lactose intolerant, and it's the weirdest connections, but
Doesn't everyone have their favourite cheese? Is
Yes.
it just me? I mean,
We'll do a poll later.
yeah.
Recently, we did a kind of listener relay where, say you were listening in Oslo, you would write in and say, my favourite place is the Philippines, and then someone in the Philippines would pick up the baton and they would say, so there's this idea with our audience that they all use the podcast for the same reasons, which is to get across the news. They're curious about the world, but also how the world sees them. That's quite crucial. But also they've got a sort of shared love of information. Some of them say, you know, it helps them to be news fluent, which is quite a nice expression. They wrote in and said that, and helps them to, you know, be part of a conversation with their colleagues or student friends or whoever. And they're just very, very nice.
They are very, very nice. They are, I think a lot of people possibly here will know that sometimes interactions with audiences can be a little hostile, but ours are lovely. We are in some sort of strange little bubble. You know, interactions on social media or by email, even when they're complaining, they tend to be nice about it. No, we are very, very fortunate. They are interested in each other as well. So when we did one of the coronavirus specials, people were communicating with each other about how they were coping and their tips for dealing with isolation and how they were doing things and what they were getting up to. And it was very supportive, but it also explained about the universality of the experience, even in completely different places. They are really nice people, our listeners.
Building a proper community.
You should probably subscribe. Sorry.
Building a proper community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Community.
Exactly, and I'm just to show you a couple of slides. I'm not really big on slides, but it shows you there the breakdown. Obviously, we're an English-speaking podcast, so the countries that mostly download us, you know, are English speaking, but we're growing markets in other countries. We're not doing too badly with young audiences, which is the holy grail, so 30% under 27.
It's a fantastically random number.
They're very random. But it's this idea that they're loyal, I think, and loyal and to be nurtured, I think, not to be taken for granted. You can see here some figures. So what happens is we have a loyal following, and then we get extra interest when there's a major story. So you see the peaks there for COVID, for US elections and the Ukraine war. Suddenly there'll be spikes for those things. Partly that's because we will get a bit of a marketing push or, you know, trailing ahead from other news programs when big stuff's going on. So they'll say for more on that, you know, go to the Global News podcast. And then here, these are showing you the World Service English portfolio of podcasts. And from starting in that back room where no one was paying any attention whatsoever, you can see now, compared to all the other podcasts we do, and actually those are just, you know, the top few, we are miles ahead. So we're very proud of that. When I said I was cutting the cake for the 10 millionth download that month, we are now at 33 million a month. So I need a pay rise. And then here, for people that are interested in platforms, it just shows you there that what we have in the UK is something called Sounds, and it's a platform, but we don't have that internationally. And so mostly our podcasts are found on Apple, but it's just to do with how people find their podcasts.
It's been a phenomenal success, and you talk about audience in other countries. Are you doing anything to specifically address different markets, or are you going to continue to do the same thing?
Well, hopefully, this is the start of a kind of global news podcast on tour. Which, before the end of this session, we'll tell you all about the live show that we're recording this evening, or shall we do that now?
Yeah, do that now, please, yeah.
So for the first time, we are going to record in the room next door a live podcast, and we really, really encourage you to come. Again, as Ralph's presentation said, people do better with applause and audiences, and it would be really nice if you were there. It's starting at 5:15, or the doors open at 5:15. We've got 3 correspondents from the region coming along, and we've got questions from our audience. So some of the Global News Podcast listeners who are nothing to do with this event are coming along. They'll be asking questions. Jackie will be keeping everyone in check.
I'll be trying.
You'll be trying. And the best thing about it is, if you come to that, the drinks don't start till we're finished. So you can then go straight out to the bar.
That's right. So the doors open at 5:15 and we start recording at 5:30, don't we? So start thinking about some questions that you might want to ask as well to be part of the podcast.
Yes, actually, if you do want to ask a question, just find me wandering about so we can write your question down.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, both of you. That's been fantastic. And so you're going to be here for the rest of the day. And tomorrow. So if you do have any questions, then catch up with Jackie and Karen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen,